Hey everyone, my name is Julian B. Saranilia and we are the Use Slow group. My group members are Alonzo John Puli, who will report the philosophers who criticize ethics. Devera Mario Jolica A. She will report the benefits of the theory and questions to reflect the theory. Galicia Godwin, who will report the applications of the theory in the issues. Paraga Serlina F., the definition of Kantian ethics and famous thinkers or proponents and opponents. And I will report the classification of Kantian ethics, the criticisms of Kantian ethics, and the evaluation of the theory.
So good day everyone. Our group will discuss about the Kantian ethics. So what is Kantian ethics? Kantian ethics refers to the deontological ethical theory developed by German philosopher Immanuel Kant that is based on the notion that it is impossible to think of anything at all in the world or even beyond it that could be considered good without limitation except a good will. So, Kant's ethics states that human beings must follow a categorical imperative, which is an absolute moral standard that does not base on individual circumstances. Kant stated that a behavior is only ethical when it would remain beneficial if performed universally by everyone. Philosopher Immanuel Kant described his ethics in his Groundings for Metaphysics of Morals. Kant's categorical imperative differs from a hypothetical imperative in which a certain action is taken in order to attain an end that an individual wants for himself. Kant felt that ethics could not be determined from a hypothetical imperative because it is too subjective. In contrast, the categorical imperative is derived a priori from reason, not from an individual's experience or material circumstances. For example, a rich person is not required to work hard because he has all he needs. Nevertheless, the decision to abandon work would be unethical in Kant's view because it cannot be taken universally without harming society. Therefore, working hard is a categorical imperative, even if it does not fit the individual circumstances of a rich man. Ethical behavior under the categorical imperative is not a means to an individual end, but an absolute end in itself. Goodwill and duty. In his combined works, Kant constructed the basis for an ethical law from the concept of duty. Kant began his ethical theory by arguing that the only virtue that can be unqualified with good is a good will. No other virtue has this status because every virtue can be used to achieve immoral ends. For example, the virtue of loyalty is not good if one is loyal to an evil person. The goodwill is unique in that it is always good and maintains its moral value even if it fails to achieve its moral intention. Kant regarded the goodwill as a single moral principle which freely chooses to use the other virtues for moral ends. For Kant, a good will is a broader conception than a will which acts from duty. A will which acts from duty is distinguishable as a will which overcomes hindrances in order to keep the moral law. A dutiful will is thus a special case of a good will which becomes visible in adverse conditions. Kant argues that only acts performed with regard to duty have moral worth. Kant's conception of duty does not entail that people perform their duties accordingly.
So after we define the definition of Kantian ethics, next is we will define its classification. Kantian ethics classification. Is it utilitarianism? Is it natural law? Or is it deontological? So first we will discuss the utilitarianism. What is utilitarianism? So when we say utilitarianism or Consequentialist, the teleological. The word teleuter is the Greek word teleos, which means the end or the perfection. This theory is, the basis of this theory is the end result, or what is the consequence of your particular action. So, example nito ay yung trolley, di ba? In that situation, yung pupuntahan talaga ng tren doon is yung tatlong tao na mamamatay. Pero yung isa, kapag switch mo yung route, pupunta siya sa isa, di ba? So, magiging utilitarianism siya kung isi-switch mo yung tren. Kasi nga, nakabase ka sa consequence, di ba? Ang consequence doon is tatlo yung mamamatay o isa, di ba? Siyempre, kapag utilitarianism ka, mas pipiliin mo na mamatay yung isa kaysa mamamatay yung tatlo. Yun yung utilitarianism. Ang natural law naman is a theory in ethics and philosophy that intrinsic values that govern our reasoning and behavior. Natural law maintains that these rules of right and wrong are inherent in people and are not created by society or court judges. So, yun yung meaning ng natural law. Next is deontological. So, deontological or non-consequentialism, unlike sa utilitarianism kanina, yung basis niya is yung consequence. But this, sabi nga, di ba, non-consequentialism. So, eto, yung basis nito is the duty, the laws, di ba? So, this ethical theory uses rules to distinguish right from wrong. So, another meaning pa niya is, deontological ethics holds that at least some acts are morally obligatory regardless of their consequences for human welfare. So, sa situation ng trolley, kung papunta ka talaga sa yung tren, sa route niya is nasa tatlo, hindi siya nakabase sa consequence, kahit ilan pa yan, di ba? Kung talagang nasa deontology ka, nasa rules yan. So, balik tayo. Is it utilitarianism? Is it natural law? Or the deontological? So, ano kaya yung classification ng Kantian ethics dito? So, yung classification niya is, Kant's theory is an example of deontological moral theory. Why? Bakit deontological moral theory? Kasi according to these theories, the rightness or wrongness of action does not depend on their consequences, but on whether they fulfill our duty. So yun, sinabi kanina kung ano yung deontological moral theory. Because Kant believed that there was a supreme principle of morality, and he referred to it as the categorical imperative. So, ayan.
So, those who are influenced by the Kantian ethics includes social philosopher Jürgen Habermas. He is a German philosopher who has proposed a theory of discourse ethics that he claims is a descendant of Kantian ethics. He proposes that actions should be based on communication between those involved, in which their interests and intentions are discussed so they can be understood by all. Next is political philosopher John Rawls. The social contract theory of political philosopher John Rawls, developed in his work A Theory of Justice, was influenced by Kant's ethics. Rawls argued that just as society would be fair, to achieve this fairness, he proposed a hypothetical moment prior to the existence of a society at which a society is ordered. And then, psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan linked psychoanalysis with Kantian ethics in his works The Ethics of Psychoanalysis and Kant avec Sade. Comparing Kant with Marcus de Sade, Lacan argued that Sade's maxim of jouissance, the pursuit of sexual pleasure or enjoyment, is morally accepted by Kant's criteria because it can be universalized. While those who criticize and argued about Kant's ethics includes German philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He criticized that Kant for not providing enough detail in his moral theory to affect decision-making and for denying human nature. The Catholic Church has criticized Kant's ethics as contradictory and regards Christian ethics as more compatible with virtue ethics. And then the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. He argues that ethics should attempt to describe how people behave and criticize Kant for being prescriptive.
Criticism of Kantian ethics. Kantian ethics. Philosophers who criticize Kantian ethics. One is G.W.F. Hegel. Second is Arthur Schopenhauer. Third is Friedrich Nietzsche. Fourth is John Stuart Mill. And last is Roman Catholic priest Hervé Pincaire.
Wave Beats Music.
German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel presented two main criticisms of Kantian ethics. He first argued that Kantian ethics provides no specific information about what people should do because of Kant's moral law is solely a principle of non-contradiction. His second criticism was that Kant's ethic forces humans into an internal conflict between two reason and desire. He argued that Kant's ethics lack any content and so cannot constitute a supreme principle of morality. His followers have presented a number of cases in which the formula of universal law either provides no meaningful answer or gives an obviously wrong answer. Second is German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. He criticized Kant's belief that ethics should concern what ought to be done, insisting that the scope of ethics should be to attempt to explain and interpret what actually happened. He believed that virtue cannot be taught a person is either virtuous or is not. He cast the proper place of morality as explaining and guiding people's behavior rather than presenting unattainable universal laws. Next is philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Criticized all contemporary moral systems with a special focus on Christian and Kantian ethics. He argued that all modern ethical systems share two problematic characteristics. First, they make a metaphysical claim about the nature of humanity, which must be accepted for the system to have any normative force. And second, the system benefits the interests of a certain people, often over those of others. His primary objection is not that metaphysical claims about humanity are unattainable. He also objected to ethical theories that do not make such claims. His two main targets, Kantianism and Christianity, do make metaphysical claims, which therefore feature prominently in nature criticism. Next is utilitarian philosopher John Stuart Mill. Criticized Kant for not realizing that moral laws are justified by a moral intuition based on utilitarian principles. He argued that Kant's ethics could not explain why certain actions are wrong without appealing utilitarianism. He believed that his principle of utility has a strong grounding than Kant's reliance on reason, and he can better explain why certain actions are right or wrong. Last is Roman Catholic priest Hervé Pincaire. Criticized modern desire for ethics to be autonomous and free from authorities such as the Church, a development he partially attributes to thinkers such as Kant. He regarded Christian ethics as closer to the virtue ethics of Aristotle than Kant's ethics. He presented virtue ethics as freedom for excellence, which regard freedom as acting accordance with nature to develop one's virtues. Initially, this requires following rules, but the intention is that the agent develop virtuously and regard acting morally as a joy.
So next is the criticisms of Kant's duty or the criticisms of the theory. So ano nga ba yung mga kritisismo? So some of Kant's rules would become inconsistent when universalized. So although Kant showed that some rules would become inconsistent when universalized, this does not tell us which rules are morally valid, di ba? Kasi example nito, what if maging universal law yung pwedeng mag-asawa ng more than one, di ba? More than two, yung iba ayaw nila. Hindi mo naman sila pwedeng pilitin para mag-asawa, di ba? At sa iba, talagang hindi talaga pwede. Example pa is maging universal yung pagpatay, killing. So, hindi mo pwedeng ipilit na maging universal yung pagpatay kasi ayaw nilang magpatay, and kung magpapatayan, pwedeng magpatay, edi lahat ng tao mamamatay na, 'di ba? So, pwede ba kayang maging universal yon? And sabi pa dito, Kant never showed us how to resolve conflicts between equally absolute rules, 'di ba? And Kant did not distinguish between making an exemption to a rule and qualifying a rule. So, kahit gaano ka-complex yung rules or laws, sabihin na natin na lahat ng rules is applicable sa lahat. Hindi talaga natin maiiwasan yung conflicts na mangyayari, 'di ba? Kaya, yun. And next criticisms is that some rules can be universalized without inconsistency yet still have questionable moral value. So dito, under this is Kant answered this criticism by means of the reversibility criterion. So ano ba yun? Yung reversibility criterion. So that is the would you want this done to you idea. So very common to the golden rules or do unto others what you want to do others unto you, 'di ba? Gawin mo sa iba ang gusto mong gawin sa sarili mo. And sabi pa dito, but the reversibility criterion suggests a reliance upon consequences which goes against Kant's system. So the reversibility of this the criterion nagsasuggest na ng consequence, which is against Kant's system kasi nga hindi siya nakafocus sa consequence but the duty and the duty na magagawa mo sa laws na yon. Sabi nga kanina, do unto others. So ang reverse naman nun, do not do unto others what you do not want others to do unto you, 'di ba? Kung ayaw mong gawin sa iyo, huwag mo ding gawin sa iba. So parang lalabas na magiging consequence na siya. Huwag mong gagawin kasi ayaw mong gawin sa'yo, o, diba? Dito parang nakafocus na siya sa end result. Ayan. So, next ay Kant seems to have emphasized duties over inclinations in stating that we must act from a sense of duty rather than from our inclinations. But he gave us no rule for what we should do when our inclinations, our duties are the same. Tama, di ba? Hindi mo naman pwedeng i-deny yung inclinations na meron. Baka tama din naman yung inclinations mo. Or, what if yung duties mo, tama din naman sa inclinations mo? Paano kaya yun? Ano nga yun, di ba? Paano na kaya? Next is the benefits of the theory.
My name is Majorca Rivera, 12 and 01. E. Benefits of the theory. Kant's morality is very straightforward and based on reason, making it accessible to everyone. Duty is part of human experience. Morality doesn't depend on motives, consequences, or religious laws. Categorical imperative give us rules that apply to everyone and command us to respect human life. It makes clear that morality is doing one's duty and not just following feelings. We cannot assume what is good for us is good for everyone else. Kant's equivalent of the golden rule. It aims to treat everyone fairly and justly is a correct utilitarian idea that some can suffer as long as others are happy. Kant sees humans as being of intrinsic worth as they are the rational high point of reason. This means they cannot be enslaved or exploited. Basis of the Declaration of Human Rights. Equal treatment of individuals gets rid of bias which sometimes influences decision making. Categorical imperative tells us exactly what is right and wrong, giving us a clear sense of moral guidelines. Kant draws a clear distinction between duty and preference. Moral value of an action comes from its intrinsic rightness, so issues of teleological ethics are avoided. People generally do have the same ideas about morality. Ethical practice should be based on reason, not subjective emotion. Most people recognize the idea of duty. It is part of what it means to be human. There is a difference between duty and inclination.
The three most applicable of the theory are abortion, human sexuality, medicine, bioethics. Abortion that emerged takes abortion to be morally problematic. Provisionally, to say that abortion is morally problematic is to say that there are moral considerations that weigh up against it in all or almost all instances. Then, human sexuality implicitly acknowledge the unusual power of sexual urge and their capacity to divert us from doing what is right. He claimed that the sex was particularly morally condemnable because lust focuses on the body, not the agency of those we sexually desire, and so reduces them to mere things. And lastly, medicine bioethics act in such a way that you treat humanity never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. Respect patient autonomy and dignity while simultaneously offering an ethical foundation for relationship between the patient and the physician.
The evaluation of the theory or the problem for Kant's theory. Number 1, we should do only those actions that conform to rules that we could be adopted universally. Number 2, if we were to lie, we would be following the rule. It is permissible to lie. Number 3, this rule could not be adopted universally because it would be self-defeating. People would stop believing one another and then it would do no good to lie. Therefore, we should not lie. Sabi sa number 4. So, the problem with this argument is that we can lie without simply following the rule. It is permissible to lie. Instead, we might be following a rule that pertains only to specific circumstances, like it is permissible to lie when doing so will save a life. This rule can be made universal law without contradiction. After all, it's not as though people would stop believing each other simply because it is known that people lie when doing so will save lives. For one thing, that situation rarely comes up. People could still be telling the truth almost all of the time. Even the taking of human life could be justified under certain circumstances. Take self-defense, for example. There appears to be nothing problematic with the rule. It is impermissible to kill when doing so is the only available means of defense against an attacker, diba? Bawal pumatay. Pero for an attacker, diba, kailangan mo talagang gawin. And sabi pa, it is not necessary to interpret Kant's theory as prohibiting lying in all circumstances. As Kant did, maxims and the universal laws that result from them can be specified in a way that reflects all of the relevant features of the situation. Consider the case of the understanding the universalized maxim as everyone always lies. Diba? We can understand it as everyone always lies in order to protect innocents from stalkers. Diba? Then, this maxim seems to pass the test of the categorical imperative. Unfortunately, complicated maxims make Kant's theory becomes more difficult to understand and apply. Next is, Kant is not saying that we should look at the intended consequences in order to make a moral evaluation. Kant is claiming that regardless of intended or actual consequences, moral worth is properly assessed by looking at the motivation of the action, which may be selfish even if the intended consequences are good. Kahit na mas mabuti yung consequence mo na gawin mo yun, kung talaga iba yung duty na sinasabi, hindi mo pwedeng gawin, diba? So, that's the theory of Kant, diba? That's the Kantian ethics.
H. 5 questions to reflect on the theory. 1. How does Kant fit emotion in his moral framework? 2. How does Kantian ethics work in a business setting? 3. Why does a Kantian view typically not govern most management decisions? 4. What Kant says about affirmative actions? 5. What is the fundamental principle of morality according to Kant?